Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome back to Studio 3B. Today I want to talk to you about my Gentoo Linux installation and why I've been using Gentoo Linux for the last several months. The reason why I switched back to Gentoo Linux as my primary desktop operating system from Hackintosh is that I just feel like I wanted something more powerfully in control of the computer. I didn't want to have the operating system do all the work for me. I wanted to kind of like get into the guts of it and just kind of get control and understand what is actually going on with the system and not have incompatibilities with a lot of different file formats and things. Linux does have a very robust library of file formats that it supports, and it's just much more transparent, in my opinion, than some of the other bigger operating systems like Mac OS and Windows. They kind of do a lot of the stuff for you, whereas Gentoo and other Linux distributions give you more of the control in your hands as the user. Other than that, I just want to go over some of the key points I use every day for Gentoo. So if you go to the browser, and one of the critical websites I go to is the Wiki from Gentoo. And they have this cheat sheet up here, Gentoo cheat sheet. And there's a couple commands in here that you're going to be using quite often. And one of them is you want to update your local repository with what's up to date in the cloud. And that is this command, emate auto sync. So that's the first command, and there's a couple different iterations of how to use that command. But that's pretty much like the pacman syu command in Arch, and it just basically syncs your repository, the list of packages available and everything like that, with the most up-to-date recent stable versions. The next command that I'm going to use quite often is this command, emerge ask, and I don't do quiet, I do update change to use deep world. What this does is takes all your currently installed packages and updates them to the latest ones that you just got from the sync you did previously. So this runs, downloads all the source that you needed for the all the recent updates that have come out since you last ran this command, and it downloads them and compiles them. This is typically something to run at nighttime before you're done using the computer at night, and it takes anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours depending on what libraries have been updated. But this is handy to keep your system up to date. To install one piece of software, all you do is simply emerge ask, and then you put the package name right there. And what that does is it downloads the source, compiles it, installs it, just like apt and pacman and yum and things like that, except that here we're compiling locally for your particular architecture. Not to get into too many technical details here, but there are other commands on here that are very useful, and a more in-depth tutorial, if that's something you're looking for, I can go into. The next big thing that you're going to do is upgrade your kernel. When new kernels come out, you're going to want to update those. So you're going to get the new kernel sources when you do this previous update command. But then you're going to have to go extra steps to actually compile and install this kernel. So you select the kernel that you want. You link your user source Linux directory to the actual version of the user source Linux directory, to the latest version that you want to use. And when you go to that directory, you can update your config file, your make config. This is specifying all the different config parameters for your kernel. And this is something that you do on the install. So there's plenty of videos out there and plenty of tutorials on how to install Gentoo Linux. So this is something you do initially, is configure your kernel. And when you upgrade to the latest kernel, you're going to have slight variations in the kernel configs. And those you have to go through and see what your settings are going to be. But usually you just can accept the defaults is fine. Yeah, so make menu config is the visual representation of going through the config parameters. Typically for a typical kernel, I don't know, it might take like an hour to compile. I haven't really timed it, but it does take a significant number of minutes to compile a kernel. Like I said, besides compiling the kernel and having to compile your packages, it runs very much like a typical Linux installation, like Arch or Debian Red Hat, all those kind of things, for Fedora, I should say. You could run virtual machines. You could run Windows on a virtual machine, and here I have my Rune installation on Windows because the client does not run properly on Linux. So I run the client on Windows, and that way I could, choose my songs I want to play. And I also do Office work. Here I have Office installed, and I could do anything having to do with Windows, develop for Visual Studio and things like that. I do have 32 gigs of RAM installed on this computer, so associating 16 gigs for the Windows VM is fine for me. So that's cool. So you have all this typical stuff that you see in Linux, just like every other Linux distribution. You have all the same software available. But there's one critical thing I want to show you is if you really want to save your solid state disk usage and shorten your compile time for emerging packages, one thing you can do is mount your portage directory to a temp file system, which is running right in RAM. And for smaller packages, you can configure it to run and compile right in memory, and it's significantly faster. Those are my tips, and that's a little tour of Gentoo Linux. It's a very brief overview. I was not trying to go into a detailed, specific how-to for Gentoo. So if you can't figure it out, come to me, ask me, I will do a video. Thanks for watching. I hope that this little tour was useful. And with that, I am going to sign off.